Well, good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? Good? You got some food on your tummy? Yeah, that's good. My name is DC Tardy, Senior Program Manager with the Configuration Manager team, responsible for the hierarchy and all the replication. A lot of other stuff too, but specifically we're going to talk about replication today. And really, as if you were in my talk yesterday, I said I was going to really open up the hood and look deep. So, seeing as how this is after your lunch, and this is going to be kind of some deep information, I want to really keep your attention here. So, it's great to see you guys here, and I really appreciate you attending this session. You're going to get to understand what goes on in replication within Configuration Manager. Since we've changed it so drastically from SMB, replicating inbox, into now SQL replication, our replication processes that we created. And so what I want to go through is really kind of give you the what, the what, where, when, why, and how of when you actually go into troubleshooting, what you're actually troubleshooting and when you should do it, why you might do it, and then finally, of course, how you might actually go about troubleshooting. What we did as far as my previous talk, I really kind of pointed to the simplification of hierarchy and the simplification of replication in particular, and that's what I still want to get across to you, because I don't want you to expect that you're going to be doing a whole lot of some of the stuff that I'm going to be showing you today, but I want you to be well prepared in your toolbox, right? So I don't want you, even though I'm going to be showing you some SQL statements, some things, the tables and what's going on behind the scenes, I don't think that you're going to be having to do a lot of that. I really don't want you to be doing a lot of that, but it really helps for you to understand what's going on behind the scenes in SQL replication. So I'm going to do a little overview so that you understand, if for those of you that might not have been here before yesterday, or just to refresh your memory so you know how we're going through this. But you know, the central administration site has no clients. No clients report up to a central administration site. This is different from 2007. The reason why is we don't want to do a whole lot of processing at that central administration site, because replication occurs at the central administration site to all of the primaries below. We want to keep that intact and moving appropriately. Now, you should always install a central administration site, again, if you have more than 100,000 clients, because that would require more than one primary. So you have to have a central administration site for more than one primary. You may, and in a lot of cases, if you ever think you're going to go over that 100,000 limit or add more than one primary site server, you need to install a central administration site before you bring up your Configuration Manager 12 environment. What SQL versions do we support? We're very specific on our SQL versions in our supported configurations doc, and that's the reason why, and the reason why we do this is we are very specific on some of the optimizations that SQL Server has provided for us. In fact, there was one provision in R2, a cumulative update that was released on Monday evening, that we're going to require as part of a supported configuration for SQL Server 2008, R2, SP1, cumulative update 6. All right, so that's one. Certainly we support SQL Server 2008, SP2, and SP3 with those specific. Look at my previous presentation from yesterday. It has the supported configurations for the SQL versions. Now, some people ask as well about the enterprise SKU versus the standard SKU. Because of replication and the way we perform replication, when we get to the higher numbers of clients that we want to support in the environment, we'll want to have the enterprise SKU on the central administration site Certainly when you have more than one primary. And the reason why is we take advantage of inbuilt partitioning within SQL Server 2008, partitioning of the data so that we can rapidly manage certain scenarios within replication and partition the data on a per primary site basis. Now, does that mean you need SQL Server Enterprise SKU across your whole entire environment? No. You only would need it, and it's only supported to have if you have got a CAS in your configuration manager environment, then you must have SQL Enterprise loaded on that CAS if you have more than 50,000 clients in your environment. If you do not have a central administration site and you only have a standalone primary site, standard will work just fine. Okay? So I wanted to try to clarify that a little bit. You may have questions later. But again, enterprise required at the central administration side if you have more than 50,000 clients or expect to support more than 50,000 clients in your environment. Otherwise, if it's going to be less than 50,000 clients and you have a central administration site, you can load standard on it. All right? That's the kind of the simple rule of thumb there. Now, the primary. What happens here? This is really where all the processing goes on. This is where all the status messages come up from the clients, and that stuffs the information into this SQL Server database in order for us to replicate up to the central administration site. And potentially any of the other information that might be managed at a primary site for whatever reason replicated across the entire hierarchy. So we'll go just a refresher on how the replication modes again, so you don't have to be thinking, how does that happen again? What did he say yesterday? I've already told you what SQL versions are supported at the primary site. All you need is standard at this point, and it is required to have standard at this point. But at secondary site, how do you get it installed? The secondary site is a push install. The secondary site is a push install from, you can initiate it from the central administration site, or you can initiate it from a primary site. Upon the push install pushes out SQL Server 2008 R2 Express. Okay, that's what we, SP1. SQL Server 2008 R2 Express SP1. That's what it gets pushed out. And because of our requirements of the service packs, you're going to want to go to your secondary sites after a push, and I mean not service packs, for cumulative updates. You're going to want to go back to your SQL Express secondary sites after you install them fresh and get up to the latest CU6 on that R2 Express cumulative update. The reason why we didn't do that specifically during the install is because it does have a certain footprint, and we want to be able to install your secondary site very quickly and make sure it works. So if you don't have the cumulative update, your secondary site will work, and it will work fine. There are some optimizations in that cumulative update that we do really want you to load on those secondary site servers. So the hierarchy overview, again, we've simplified it a lot. This is just a real simple picture to say you've got a central administration site. You've got one level of primaries, so one tier of primaries, up to 25 wide at any time, up to 25 wide total supported. And each one of those primaries can support up to 100,000 clients. We support up to 400,000 clients in the entire hierarchy. And then, of course, you can have secondary sites, up to 250 secondary sites underneath each primary site server. So the concepts of replication of global data, again, using that rule of thumb, basically any object that an administrator types into the administrative console, in addition to the site control file, that is global data and is present across the entire hierarchy. For site data, that data there is what is system generated, the status messages, the hardware inventory, the software inventory, metering data, all of that type of information is processed by the primary site and shows up at the CAS, but the CAS is the only one with the full picture of the entire hierarchy for that site data. You won't be able to see that site data in any type of reports or administrative console from primary 2 for site data that was reported via primary 1. The only place that's available is at the central administration site. And then the global proxy data is at the secondary site servers, and that is a subset of the data that is global data considered replicated across your CAS and all your primaries. Okay? Hope I'm not losing anybody. I know this is some detail. We're going to get even a little bit more detail, but I'll keep going. Do you want me to keep going? Okay. All right. So this is a simplistic view here. This simplistic view here is another way to look at it. What is global data? How is it replicated? This is global data replicated between the central administration site and the primary site. Additional global proxy data is that subset of data that's replicated from the primary site to all of its reporting secondary sites. Okay, just another way to look at it, so it kind of solidifies in your mind. I know just words on the page sometimes it needs some pictures to back it up. So it's kind of another way of showing you. Now let's talk about the site data here. For the site data again rolls up from your primary site to your central administration site. Period. That's it. It's that simple as far as site data goes. So it's a one-way replication up from the primary to the central administration site. Now, some of you may have heard in the past, we had looked at different replication technologies, potentially looking at the SQL replication services. We don't use SQL replication services, so you don't have to install those components for the purposes of a standard hierarchy replication. The caveat to that is if you do have an MP replica in your environment, you would have the SQL replication services for MP replicas. But if you don't have MP replicas in your environment, you don't need the additional burden of that SQL replication components within your SQL server. We've created the DRS, which I'll explain in greater detail, which handles the replication of data for global and site data. It's thus the bidirectional updated each way, and therefore that's the reason why this information is put down here for bidirectional or unidirectional for site data. Some examples of these pieces of data. We've already talked about these in a little bit of detail, such as the rules of thumb that I'm giving you. That rule of thumb for the site data is the system generated, and the rule of thumb for admin for global data is admin generated data. All right? So this is just here for your reference. I'm not going to go into just reading this to you because you can read yourselves. Specifically, I showed this slide in my presentation yesterday in regard to the replication groups. This is what we use to determine how we replicate data across the hierarchy. We assign a subset of tables within the whole database to a particular replication group, and for that replication group, we use it to send data across the hierarchy, whether it's global or whether it's site data. And this tells you here, I don't have a, or I don't know how to use it, a laser pointer. Anyway, doesn't matter. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so I'll use this one over here. So you see the replication pattern. This tells you if that replication group is a global replication group or whether it's a site replication group or whether it's a global proxy replication group. So you can find out, I'll show you how to find out what tables are in these groups in just a minute. But you also see the sync interval here, which describes how often this replication group is updated. So we check to make sure for this one, it's a pretty important replication group because it contains things like the SCF and other control type of information we make sure that this is up to date every 1 minute. So every minute we make sure if there are any changes, we start replicating that across your hierarchy. So in general terms, if the change is made at a primary site, it's going to be at all primary sites within your hierarchy within 2 minutes. That's essentially what that says. It could, give or take a couple of minutes depending on timing and so on and so forth. And then finally, this transport type will always remain DRS at this point because DRS is our replication model and the replication that we created based using SQL Server. And just a history piece of information that used to say SQL when we were potentially looking at the SQL rep. We don't use SQL rep anymore, so you should see DRS all the way down for all the replication groups. And we have about 40, 50 replication groups, and that depends on, because as you add hardware inventory, you'll see an additional replication group added for that. And so you might have hardware inventory 1, 2, 3 through N hardware inventory replication groups. And then we'll just go ahead and move to look at the overview again of the replication. What goes on with global replication. This is another picture to kind of etch that in your mind so you can kind of understand what's going on with global replication and what types of replication types we are sending between the central administration site and the primary site, and then finally between the primaries and the secondaries. I'll get to your question towards the end when we start getting. So the is push. So at this point, we're not going to go into a lot of detail about the is push. So there's not something that you need to understand about is push at this point because it's not relevant for our discussions in troubleshooting and so forth. And then finally for the site replication overview, the site replication overview again, still the straight replication of that site data, system generated data from your primaries to your central administration site. Okay, etch that in your memory as well and think about it as we go on. Now, as we move across to RCM, this is our new component. This component runs under SMS exec. It runs every 2 minutes. It talks to SQL Server and makes sure that our DRS, data replication service, actually performs its duties. And as DRS performs its duties, it monitors that. RCM stands for Replication Configuration and Monitoring. So it kicks those things off, makes sure the replication is happening. We have a lot of code written in SQL CLR on the SQL Server. The reason why, and this is kind of a side note here, and it's important information for you to know, with SQL 2008, we have provided you with some specifications for memory required for your SQL Server and how to reserve it. SQL 2008 and 2008 R2, the memory buffers do not manage SQL CLR. And SQL, as you probably well know, is very aggressive at memory usage. It will go out and grab as much memory as by default. Part of our prereqs tell you to go ahead and set, if you're running your SQL Server and your site server on the same box in a colo fashion, that you should have SQL memory set to a maximum of 50% of the available memory of the box. This is so it allows for other processing, of course, for the site server processing to occur, the OS processing to occur, and for our SQL CLR to actually occur. And that's where the DRS, data replication services, are performing its replication between SQL servers. If you're running a SQL Server, which is highly recommended, running your SQL Server on a remote SQL Server to your site server, where you have pretty much a standard or a specific usage for that SQL Server, we recommend you use 80% maximum of memory for SQL Server to take. That's so that 20% is still left over so our SQL CLR can run, and so the OS can run, basically. So that's essentially why we give you those maximums of memory and those warnings in the setup. And that's specifically so essentially replication can occur, because we have very good experience to know that if we let SQL defaults occur, it'll take up all the memory. You're not going to be replicating because we can't run our SQL CLR. All right? There are some tables that we're going to go through in just a minute. I'm going to pop open the SQL Management Studio, show you some examples of these tables here on the vServer data, vReplication data, and vArticle data, which tells you a little bit more about what's going on in replication. So from the server data, it describes essentially how a hierarchy is configured in certain site IDs and things of that nature for the servers, site servers themselves. For the replication data, that replication data describes essentially those replication groups that I was just showing you a little bit earlier. And then finally, for the article data, that article data is the list of tables that are part of each replication group, which I've kind of been describing as well. So it's a little, when you see it in the queries for SQL Server, you'll see exactly what I mean. Now, when RCM kicks off every 2 minutes, it's going to kick off and take a look at the, not take a look at, but it is monitoring what's going on in SQL Server, but it's going to initiate DRS in the SQL Server, because I'm going to reiterate at least something that I said yesterday. I don't think I've said it yet again today, that SQL replication occurs between SQL Server to SQL Server over port 4022 by default. That's configurable, but that's the default SQL Server service broker port. And so we look and monitor what's going on with that. So when RCM kicks off, it's going to go out to the SQL Server, and we're going to find out, let's look at primary 1. Was there a change at primary 1? If there was a change at primary 1, then essentially it's going to say, okay, package up all the changes in a single little package, put it in the queue on the service broker, pop that or send that data up using SQL Server Service Broker to your central administration site. The central administration site, as its RCM kicks off, will continue to look at, in the SQL Server queues, all those SSB queues, and find out if there's data, pull the data in, and push the data into its SQL Server, and then initiate all those changes out to all of the subsequent peer primary sites. And this happens in the course of about, between 2 to 4 minutes, depending on when RCM kicks off and because of the how the replication group intervals are set. They're set mainly between, and we'll go through this in just a second, but every 1 minute, every 2 minutes, or every 5 minutes, depending on the type of data. And that's per replication group, which contains, again, those tables called article data underneath each replication group. All right, that explains this one. We rely heavily on change tracking, and I'll go through a little bit more detail on change tracking in the next slide. But I've already told you about the SQL Server Service Broker. The key here is it provides guaranteed delivery, which is nice because we stuff data in that queue. We know that that data is going to get up to the associated peer, in this case, from the primary to the central administration site that we just got through talking about. We have these two CLR code that two stored procedures called the message builder, basically, and the message handler. And one is bundling up all of the changes. One is reading off all of the changes and stuffing it into the database server. Okay, that's the difference between the builder and the handler. Builder builds the data and sends it. Handler reads the data and handles it and stuffs it into the SQL database. Specifically on this one, the queues potentially have, and we'll go through this in some of the, I've broken some of my hierarchy, and we're going to go through that, and some of the data gets stuck in the queue, if you will, because it can't communicate with the other side. It's got, I'll show you how you can look at the queue and see that there's data actually there. The SQL Server Service Broker has a conversation handles between its primary and the central administration side, or the primary and its secondary site server, and that queue is what the data gets sent over again using this messaging. And like it says here, the messaging is asynchronous, but it is in fact guaranteed, which is really a nice thing. So as far as change tracking goes, when do we know there is a change that we need to replicate across the hierarchy? Well, we utilize SQL Server's change tracking capabilities to record that for us when data is changed. Now, the key to note here is we don't track it at the column level of a particular row within a table. It tracks it at a table row level. Okay? So if any data within a row of a table is changed, we replicate that row of data up. All right? Or down, whichever the case may be in the hierarchy, CAS down to the primaries or primaries up to the CAS. We have change version, so we know that for the data that's sent up from our primary, we know what version of the data is sent up. And for data that's sent down from the CAS to the primary, we know what version of that data is sent down, and that's how we keep track of where we are within all of the changes that might occur. So if you have, for instance, a SQL Server or a network go down for any point of time, we know by these version numbers where we left off in history. And so if we have version number 1 located at our primary, but the CAS says, you know, hey, I'm already on version number 20. Well, we know that we need to take all the changes from 1 to 20, as an example, from the CAS, and the CAS will send that down once the network is repaired or the SQL Server is brought back up, or whatever the case may be in that situation. That's what the version numbering is all about. You look at the version message activity, DRS message activity, to look at what the versions, when they were sent, each side of the conversation that I was talking to you about, and we can keep track of that information in this particular view on VDRS_message activity in that view. So this slide essentially talks to you just as a visual representation of that table, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. I've already explained that information. So from an RCM role, I've kind of gotten ahead of myself. I told you that it's really taken in control all of the SQL CLR in the database, making sure that the message handler and the message builder runs, making sure that the data is monitored and everything's occurring as it should, and reporting back to you via the administrative console what's going on in the replication of your the replication activity within your hierarchy. RCM has essentially 3 threads that you can look through in your RCM control log. Those threads really correspond to exactly what I got through telling you. 1 thread for monitoring, 1 thread for the message builder, and 1 thread for the message handler. So building the message, setting them up, reading the messages off the queue and stuffing it into the database. We have a concept which you may have or have not heard in the past, and that concept is a concept of backlog. You might initially think that that concept really relates to the fact that a backlog might occur when a database network connectivity is down and the backlog's at the CAS trying to send data down to the primary. In our vernacular, backlog is actually the data that has already arrived in the SQL Server Service Broker queue and is awaiting processing to be punched into the SQL Server itself. So that backlog really tells you how quickly am I actually processing data as it comes in? So you might find out that you need, more database performance, and that database performance would typically be needing more disk performance because of the write activity that is required. We keep track of any type of changes because as you change in the schema, I'll give you a quick example. As you add additional classes to your hardware inventory, we'll change the schema, we'll increase the amount of information that's coming up from your site data, and we've got to make sure that that's replicated at this central administration site, and we do make those changes, and we provide certain pieces of, we provide these stored procedures that handle update and insert, the insert procedure, and we handle it via delete stored procedures when data is deleted. So you might have something inserted and updated potentially at the same time because it all comes in one big package, or you just do one update as an example. But this information can be tracked in the view called DRS message activity as we discussed previously. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about each one of these views here, but I list them out here for you to kind of get an understanding, and you can go and do some of these queries, which we'll do here in a minute, yourselves. You can query on these views and see what types of information is in there, and I'll give you kind of what's your appetite with some of the queries that we're going to do here in a minute and help you understand it. Always seeing it in action always helps us kind of solidify that. These are the queues that we rely on in the SSB, in addition to the stored procedures and what they do. They're named after what they do, essentially. So pretty much, I wouldn't expect that you would be using these in particular, these stored procedures, because that's primarily used for our data replication service. It's just so that you can know what we're using and what's going on behind the scenes. Okay. A lot of talking. I can see you're probably ready for some demos. That way we can not let everybody fall off to sleep, right? Okay, so let's get a demo going. All right, so I have up the SQL Management Studio. As part of the SQL Management Studio, I've preloaded a whole bunch of queries in here for us to go through so you can kind of understand it a little bit better. And I've already run the select from vServer data so you can kind of get a look and feel for what is in my hierarchy. We can see here that we've got a central, primary 1, primary 2, and secondaries. We see their site codes and what their roles are. The role CCAR is kind of historical. I won't go into the history there and why we originally called it CCAR, but suffice it to say the CCAR is the central administration site. Okay, and then your peers are those primary sites, of course, and then finally you've got the proxies, which are your secondary sites. That's how that equates over, and you just kind of get a little view into your hierarchy just from this SQL view itself, and understand what database it's using, and of course what the instance it's using, or it could be its own default. So let's look at SP-diag DRS. So we've done something really, I guess, kind from a troubleshooting perspective. We've provided the the stored procedure, SP-diag DRS, which encapsulates a whole lot of queries into one, and allows for you to, once I run this, you'll see that it will show you a whole lot of information in, I'll go through this in just a minute, in your hierarchy from this perspective, querying it on the CAS. So we just, let me figure out how to raise this up a little bit. And essentially, there are the understanding that this is run from the CAS and our queues enabled. So it's looking at, is the service broker actually running? Is it set up and running properly? Sometimes the queues, not sometimes, it could happen in rare instances, I should say, that the queues might be inactive, and they need to be enabled. And I'll show you the easy way to get them enabled, which is all UI based, all very admin friendly based, we have a tool, which I'll go into detail later, called the Replication Link Analyzer. I'm just kind of teasing you at this point so you think, wow, if these break, what am I going to do? Well, we've got a tool to help you out with it if in fact something does happen. And then we go into these replication groups here, and we see that the initialization status, which we've talked about initialization in my previous presentation, but essentially once a new primary site comes online, you've got to initialize all the data, right? All that data has got to be sent and in sync with its central administration site and the primary. And so this tells you that, in fact, this data is active. So you can have an active site but a broken link. An active site says you've had successful replication setup and initialization setup initially, and then you might have a broken link which has a failure on some of your replication because the network's down or some other reason like that, some externals. And then this just goes into a little bit more detail here. I've specifically failed a primary site 2, and we'll go into the reason why in just a minute, but you can see here that the status on these for the links on these replication groups from the CAS to the primary site, well, it's failed. You'll see in the next demo that in fact why it's failed. And you can kind of go through this, and you can briefly see the CAS to PR2 and the PR2 to CAS. So you've got your one way down, your one way up, and see all the information there. And then you start looking at your site data, which is just going to be from PR2 to CAS, and that's just going to be one way. And then finally, you've got your, in this case, primary 1, and all the status for primary 1 is active because that one is actually working, and it's on purpose that that's the case as well. So you go into just a little bit more of the stored procedure. Sorry for the screen. I hope you guys can see this, but the rest of the information provides you with the certificate pieces to make sure that the certificates are correct. It can help you potentially look at the certificate thumbprints and make sure that you've got the right system certificates or self-signed certificates on the system. And then finally, a look at that database, the data table, so you know what your hierarchy looks like. That's what the first thing I showed you. All right. Finally, let's get down to, now this is, I'm going to run this one. This is not one that I would expect you to, it would be very rare that you would look in here. This would be something that would be around for if you have some very issues that are very hard to diagnose. These vlogs really track what's going on in the hierarchy, and you might see, I'm just showing this to you so you can go through here and look and see, and you can kind of poke around and just see what kind of data that we log in the vlogs, in particular to all of the activity within the replication in your hierarchy. And again, it would be a real snoozer to go through this in great detail, but you can see that there's a lot of information that we track to help for any very problematic issues that might occur that are very rare and hard to figure out. The vlogs help us do that. You can look at the replication link status and see what's going on here. I've got a list in here. Let's roll this down. I've got a list of the link status here that I'll give you in a minute. We've got the primary site link to 2, primary site link to 1. Primary 1 is good. 2 actually means good. It's working and active. 8 means it's failed. And so for our primary and our secondary site, that link has failed, and it's on purpose because we're going to fix that in just a minute. And then finally, getting to the article data, and what we need to look here is for replication data. Oops, wrong key. This is a list of all the replication groups here, and those are the ones that I was describing to you earlier. And again, the hardware inventory grows as you grow your hardware inventory classes and the more that you select, so we could add additional replication groups for that reason. And finally, if you want to look at what information is in a particular replication group as far as article data goes, you can run this query here. And again, these queries are going to be part of the recording that you get here, so you'll be able to see this information again. This isn't lost just this one time, but this tells you for this particular set of article data, for this replication group called, let's see here, the replication group called replication configuration. It has these tables in it, which includes the article data information itself, what belongs to all the replication groups, along with the hierarchy configuration and so forth. So that particular replication group is pretty important. It contains a lot of what's going on within your hierarchy. All right, so now that I've gotten a little bit kind of dove deep here in this detail, I'm going to speak a little bit more about how we would actually troubleshoot the problems that you were seeing. And you would actually see these problems not by going into the SQL database. You'd be seeing these problems in the administrative console. Again, I'm just showing these to you so you can kind of know what's going on in the background. I want to open that black box up to you and let you know that there's actually stuff going on instead of just being able to see what's in the UI. So let's go back to our demonstration here. Not our demonstration, but our presentation, and let's look at where do we look? So when you're starting to have problems, where's the first place you look? First place I want you to look is the administrative console. That's going to give you a lot of clues of what's going on. The certificates I showed you in the SP-Diag DRS sprock, that's going to show up in the administrative console. Why go out and look at the SQL Server for that information? You're going to see link status. You're going to see database out of space. You're going to see other types of configuration information that you can get out of the SQL database, but you will see that right there in the UI, and I will go through that in a little bit more detail than I did yesterday. You'll look at status messages for the components of RCM, the replication control and monitoring, and also for the hierarchy manager. You can look at status messages there. And then finally, I told you, keep this in your mind as something you should use when you think there's a problem and you don't see a problem in your administrative console, or when there is a problem and it's showing up in your administrative console, you'll see errors. You'll run the replication link analyzer, and the goal for the replication link analyzer was really to make it much like the network troubleshooter that you have today in Windows. All right, so it's pretty much point, click, and yes, here's my problem, fix it for me, or tell me what to do. That's pretty much what the replication link analyzer does, and we'll run through that. And then finally, you can look at the logs, and then lastly, I hope you never get down to this low level of looking at your SP-Diag DRS, and then finally the vlogs to find out the exact errors that might be going on. So those are That's in priority order of where you should actually look to manage your hierarchy replication. The UI, I'll go through that in a demo. You've probably seen this before. I'm not going to go into any detail on this particular slide, but go through that first. Finally, but additionally, where does that information come from? That information comes from these views and this table to fill out the information that's inside of the UI itself. All right? Just want to be totally transparent where all this information is coming from. Now, the replication status. You saw, I'm going to go back one slide. You saw, let's see, the link status here. Link status shows you the status of the connection between SQL Server at your CAS and the SQL Server at your primary for each replication group. Is that one actually getting through? Is that replication group actually active and sending heartbeats back and forth saying, yep, I'm alive, I'm working, I'm replicating? That status will tell you what's going on there, and if you need this information, here it is for you. What does number 2 mean? Tombstone I italicized because we haven't implemented that right now, but you've got deleted, so you've essentially removed the primary as an example. Once you remove a primary, we delete that replication group. You'll have a replication group deleted. If we no longer need a hardware inventory replication group number 25, we'll delete that one and you'll have a deleted status there. For Tombstone, again, it's not implemented yet. For number 2, it shows you that status is always active, and it'll show active in your administrative console. And initializing is kind of at the beginning or recovery scenarios where you're initializing your replication between your primary and your central administration site. And not started really says, okay, we're waiting. There's already some initialization work going on. For other replication groups, this replication group is waiting for its turn. Error would be some kind of error that might occur during these situations, and a lot of times the retries that we have in here, in most cases, will just fix these errors and take care of that. 6, unknown. Why did we put an unknown in there? Okay, I'll let you think about that for a second. Why would I ever have an unknown? Well, we've got tiers in our hierarchy. We've got the primary up here. We've got the CAS up here. We've got the primary here, and then we've got secondaries down here. If the primary goes down for whatever reason, or the link to the primary goes down, we don't know the status of the link between that primary and the secondaries below. So that's why you would have an unknown. And then finally, degraded, we have essentially kind of a rule of thumb. It's hard-coded now, but in general, you will go to degraded when a link is either processing and not keeping up because you have on Patch Tuesday tons of status coming in and you've got a backlog on one of your systems. It could go to degraded but stay there and everything's functioning just fine. Degraded doesn't mean that you're having a real problem. It means that you could be headed towards a problem. Degraded means that potentially your hard drives, your IOPS aren't enough to handle all the state message processing that's going on at your primary or at the central administration site. That degraded could mean that, or you're headed to a failed state. Degraded, in this case, would happen after 12 minutes of not full synchronization being set up. So it's 12 to 15 minutes in that scenario. We use a hard-coded algorithm, so if you just kind of use 12 to 15 minutes as your rule of thumb, you'll see that happen when you have either a lot of processing going on and it can't keep up. You'll go to degraded, and if it's continuing to process, it will send up sync messages, but it will not ever say I'm completed yet. And if it continues for 12 minutes or more, it'll go to degraded. It goes to failed in about 25 minutes. All right? So failed means, I haven't heard from the other side for 25 minutes. I'm failed, and, I can't get back up. So you need to do something, right? And we'll show you how to do that in just a minute. And these are the things to check within the UI. Look for active, look for degraded, look for failed, look for the configuration information. I want to jump to the demonstration in just a minute, but I want to go into the replication link analyzer. I've really been touting that a lot as something that's going to help you. It will help you immensely if there are issues, and we do a whole lot of checks in there. We've had, as you saw, this morning in Brad's keynote 2 years of experience with our replication system and a lot of the activity that's going on with our customers, be it internally or externally. We've added a lot of the feedback into that replication analyzer. It fixes a lot of things that are, you might be wondering, why don't we just make it work? Well, the question can be answered this way. There's a lot of external issues that might happen that would cause things to kind of hiccup here and there. Think about firewalls turning on and off. Think about your network going down, coming back up. Think about the server itself having issues and having nothing to do with what's going on with our replication. All these external issues can cause some issues that we need to remediate. That's why we've created the replication link analyzer to help you do that without having to go into the SQL database, run all these SQL queries, and do all kinds of cleanup and what have you. That's what we do on your behalf. These are the two reasons why you might do it if you think there's a problem or if there really is a problem. Okay? Those are the two use cases which we designed the replication link analyzer for. Now, one thing, let's see. The replication link analyzer is you can start it from the console, or you can start it from the command line. We give in our online documentation the command line parameters for doing that, but essentially it's replication link analyzer, site 1, site 2, so CAS and primary. That's really all the parameters needed to start it up and running. You'll find these types of data issues in the RCM control log or the HMAN log, and looking at the status messages pertaining to both of those components within this admin UI console. So they've got two places to look to see what's going on there. Of course, you, having looked at logs in 2007, are familiar with being able to look at the logs in 2012. We keep the same for RCM control log and the hierarchy manager log as well. That same type of information that you can find. So I'm kind of wrapping up. I know this is very kind of detailed information. We're going to end on the demo. I'm going to look at the replication link analyzer here. We're going to break DRS. I've already kind of broken it, and I'll show you how it's been broken, and then we'll go back to a working site after that. If all goes well. So let's go back to the UI. I'm at the central administration site here. As I told you previously through our queries within SQL a minute ago, that the primary site link is down and it's not active. I also showed you, you'd probably noticed it, I didn't point it out, that the secondary site is having issues as well. And we'll take a look at how to fix those two things in just a minute. So let's go to our admin console. Everything found in this administrative console is to give you good feedback of what's going on. I specifically captured this admin console. It's not, it has to be refreshed to get the state messages changed on each link. I caught it in a degraded state so you could at least see here oops, I pushed the wrong button. All right, so you can see here, I've already refreshed it. So previously, if you go back and look at the recording, you would see what the degraded looked like. It had a little red X. That's that 12 minutes to 25 minutes time period when it can go to degraded. And it'll say degraded out to the side. That was, what was there? It was a little bitty gray X icon instead of a red X icon like is showing right here. And so after the 25 minutes, which it has been, it goes finally to the failed state. We know that the secondary site has been failed, and I kind of did some really nasty stuff to it. So from a demo perspective, I'm taking a big risk at being able to fix this. Okay, so you'll be able to see this, but you wouldn't find the things that I did with this were really something that wouldn't happen normally in the wild, are very, 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 very rare. But I did some weird stuff with the virtual machine for the secondary site. So we'll get to that in a minute. Well, I'll leave that to last. So if it doesn't work, then we can go on. All right. But specifically, you can see here in the UI, additionally, that we had this information that we talked about yesterday when it pertains to what's going on with the replication status and these configuration items and the free space example and the certificates and their expiration dates and the details for those. Now, if you do need help from your SQL administrator, we wanted to make this as simple as possible, and you being able to give them some of this configuration information specifically related to how SQL Server's configured, what instances you're going to, the ports that they're using, and so forth. In addition to the status here, I've got this thing called Save Diagnostic Files. Okay? So if you click on Save Diagnostic Files, I've highlighted this link here, and I can save it out to a comma delimited file and just name this. I'm going to put it in on the desktop, and I'm going to call this Send This to My DBA, and I'll click Enter. So let's look and see what that looks like. Oops, wrong VM. Okay, I'm back on my CAS again, and I'm going to go back to the desktop and find that file, send this to my DBA, and select it and take a look at it through Notepad. So this gives you kind of a snapshot of everything on that particular link that helps give your database administrator or anybody else some idea of how that link is supposed to be configured. So this type of information you can send, and I want to make these things easy for you if you do find a situation where you do need to do some troubleshooting. So do you like that feature at all? Okay, good. Yeah, let's hear some clapping so you can wake up, right? Or I'll get you stand or sit down, do some stretches, a 7th inning stretch. We're running towards the end here. So the next thing is taking a look at the link itself. So right now, that link to the primary 2 has failed. I've specifically made a change, and we'll see what Replication Link Analyzer tells us about that. So I'm going to start the Replication Link Analyzer for that particular link, the CAS to the primary, and let's see what it detects. So what it's doing right now, it's going out and connecting to the SQL servers on that link on both sides. It's setting up the security certificates so that it can talk in an encrypted fashion, and it's beginning to set up those connections. It's running through some rules here, and you guys can't see this at the back, so let me zoom it real quick. Oh, I can't find it. Should be on my desktop, so let me do that real quick. I thought I had started it earlier and did not get it started. Okay, so with that done, let's go back to the Replication Link Analyzer and kind of give you a view of what's going on here. So the connection issues here on the Replication Analyzer say that we've got a SQL Server to SQL Server connection issue. Okay, SQL Server gives you the FQDN of both SQL servers, and it tells you, there's probably a network or firewall problem here. Well, I specifically turned on the firewall to block port 422, and I did that at the primary site too, just so I could show you the fact that, maybe I've got a firewall issue. Let's see what's going on here. So you can check to see if the problem's fixed. Well, since I haven't done anything, you're going to get another timeout here, and it's going to show you the exact same information. So I can manually go out to the secondary side, or the primary 2, and on primary 2, I had the firewalls open, and I'm going to open that back up, even though it says block SSB 4022, and oops, This is hard because the resolutions aren't too matched. Okay, so I've unblocked the SSB here, and as you well know, this is not necessarily an issue for this one, but I just went ahead and did both of the inbound and outbound rules there, but specifically the inbound's the one that would kind of block that SSB problem. And so we'll let that kind of percolate for a minute. I've turned it back on, and we can do a check again and see what's happened. And it takes a little bit for that to kind of percolate and figure out what's going on. So I'm going to have to run the replication link analyzer again so that it can recreate that connectivity to the device. I've seen it take a little bit of time for the firewall to open up the port and make everything start working again. So we're going to give this a little perk time, and then come back to it here in a minute. I skipped that rule, and it says that you've got a replication failure, and it tells you that all these replication groups are having problems communicating with that site. And so that gives you just a little bit of feedback, and it says it's probably due to some other rule that happened in the past of the replication link analyzer running. So we'll go ahead and skip this and continue. We leave here in the replication link analyzer a couple of files available for you. The log file itself, because this is part of the administrative console, we throw the log files actually on the administrative desktop of the one who's using the replication link analyzer, because we don't necessarily want you to have to be able to fight with other people that might be logged onto the same server. It's going to be thrown onto the desktop. And in this case, the log file would have the list of all the rules that were run. And it shows you and I'll just pop it open. I'm not going to go in detail on this, but essentially it gives you what have I been looking at? What rules did I run? Now the actual analysis is found in this XML file to tell you whether the rule passed or whether it failed. So we look at the SMS executive on both sides. We look at the connectivity to the SQL servers on both sides, and you can kind of see this as you go through here. And then you can see the results of the actual failure or success of each rule. So you can see here that we're looking at these different the rules as we go through here, and then finally end up that we have some connectivity issues. We've got some stuck messages. And so what does that look like? So let's go back and look at the actual messages in the SQL Server itself and show you that in fact we've got some messages stuck in the queue, and it shows you that they are stuck on the particular primary site communication. So I'm going to look, I'm at the CAS here, and I'm going to run this query on the SQL Server. Oh, I should have done this before I enabled the queue. There were messages stuck in here, and there were messages stuck in here before I dropped the firewall blockage. And so what you would have seen here is service name to broker name, and it'll tell you the FQDN and the site codes of the messages and what messages were stuck. That's going to be in that list. If I keep querying this, you may see some eventually show up that, yep, there's one. This is during the regular replication. It's sending messages out to the primary site 1 at this point. I just happen to capture it while it's doing some replication of data. Okay? For this one, you're able to see some of the status of those messages and if there are problems. Now, there may not be messages in the queue right now, but as I hit F5, there could show up some messages in the queue. But that's where you would look, and that's also in the presentation to find out if there are messages stuck in the queue somewhere. But again, the replication link analyzer takes care of this. So if we go back to our UI, and we take a look at what's going on here, if I refresh this, that one should show up as active. And it did, because there's no more messages stuck in the queue, and it can connect and find out the sync messages and all the status. So if I run the replication link analyzer again on this queue, or on this link, I should say, on the link between the primary site 2 and the central administration site, once all this gets set up, we should just fly through the rules really quickly, and it should say no issues detected. Now, it takes a little while, again, like I said, because it's setting up those connections, making the secure, getting the certificates, and making the secure, making sure that all the security for the encryption is correct. But what we found here is there are actually some queued messages on the primary site 2 that I didn't show you because I was looking at the CAS. There's some stuck messages there, and I can tell it to go ahead and fix it for me. I don't have to go into the SQL server and do that myself. The replication link analyzer will do that for me. So, but let's go and look and see those messages. Since I showed you previously, I have the primary site set up here for, I've got a direct connection in this studio. I'll just do copy these statements over into a new query for, let's see, okay, here we go. Copy those in, take a look at queues, and we've got a message stuck in the queue here, and there's a potential that messages can get stuck in the queue because it got out of sync during that time frame that I had the firewalls blocked. And it's not really a problem because once the messages are ordered in the version numbering, we know where to go back and reset the queue and go back and send what changes back up, because we've got a version number at the CAS, what the last one I received was, and we've got a version number at the primary site, and we know what changes have happened. So while I told you yesterday that there is a 5-day retention period because you might be gone for a long weekend and the server might be down for 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 days, there may be a pile of messages stuck in the queue up to 4 days long, even to 5 days long. And if you reach that 5-day threshold and go beyond before you repair your network or repair or bring your server back up, it'll have to reinitialize and get all the data sent and synced again. But we keep track of all the messages up to, all the changes up to those 5 days. So because of the fact that we've got this message stuck, I can go back over to my replication link analyzer. Is this kind of like a what? Type flight 2. This is, I'm sorry, I'm focused. So this is only specific to the new replication.
But it's functionally the same thing. I sent you a message and I didn't get it acknowledged.
Right. It's essentially this. That's exactly what is going on here. We see that this one is stuck here, and the SSB can't send it on because of how we re-enabled that firewall port, and the handle was lost between the SQL Server SSB and on the primary 2 site and the SQL Server SSB on the CAS site. So that handle was lost and it got stuck, and we opened up a new handle, and now we've got this old one stuck that didn't get sent. That's exactly what's happened. So I'll go ahead and say reset queued message. It fixes it, successfully reset it, and all the data is communicating back and forth just fine. And it continues on with the rest of the troubleshooting, and basically we're done. There's nothing else to do. We've got a good working primary site to link with the central administration site. So finally, I'm going to end up with this guy here, the primary site to secondary site. I had already preset this database free alert, and I showed that in my yesterday's presentation. I'm not going to go into any detail. There's not a big issue here because I've got plenty of 95 gig. I've got plenty of space free, but I just use that for alerting purposes. But we know that this link has failed. I don't have a clue why it's failed. As far as me as an administrator, I'm going through a scenario. Why has this failed? What's going on here? why not just run the replication link analyzer and see if it can figure it out for itself? Well, it looks like it's got something wrong with the configuration manager service here, and we just reset that. And it successfully restarted that, and then it will continue, and it says that there was a connection failure between that secondary site and the and so forth. So we're going to continue. It made that connection now that we restarted the service. And it's looking at the SQL Server service broker information to make sure that that's working appropriately. It just piles through all the same rules, but specific to the secondary site server. And as it does this, right now it's looking at that queue, making sure the queue is working, and see if there's any messages stuck in the queue. And the reason why this might take some time is we want to make sure that there are some sync messages that go up and come down. And we've got that time in between, that lag there, that it's just waiting on. And so that's the reason why this thing is waiting for a little bit. We're just waiting for our timeout value of about 2 minutes for that to make sure that the sync messages get sent. And since I just reset that, it may take, in fact, 2 minutes to get this done. So instead of talking and boring you for 2 minutes, I'm going to go to the primary site server real quick while that runs. And I'm going to do a little small, tiny, simple break on the primary site server and make sure that, okay, here we go, primary site server. I'm just going to turn off the SMS exec. Actually, I've already turned it off on the primary site. No, I haven't refreshed it. That's what my problem is. Okay, I'm going to turn off the executive on the primary site server. And I've got to do this kind of quickly because our component manager will also take into account and restart it. So that's why I waited to stop it during the presentation. And the good news about this, if you kind of think about it from a holistic perspective, when you're troubleshooting these links from the central administration site, you can just do everything from that central administration site. You don't have to log into this server, log into that server, and so on and so forth. Just run your replication link analyzer. It'll do a lot of these remediations for you. It's to make your job so much easier and get it done quickly. So if you go to the replication link analyzer for this particular one, I'm going to put that to the side, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. I'll even do a refresh. We haven't figured out that there's a problem yet, even though it is down, because it hasn't been a couple of minutes in this scenario. But in what I'm trying to communicate at this point for this scenario is maybe I know something's not acting right. I show link is active here. I want to go ahead and run the replication link analyzer just to see if there's anything going on. So I'll run the replication link analyzer on this particular link from the CAS to primary site 1, and we'll run through here and it quickly. Now I admit this is pretty simple, but it is actually very effective. It notices that the SMS executive is in fact not running. So I can just quickly restart it here, or I might happen to know there's some kind of maintenance going on in the ops team, and I may want to call up the ops team and say, you know, maybe I don't have the permissions to go ahead and restart and stop services or what have you. Get the ops team to go in, log on the box, start the service, and that way I can run the check to see if the problem's fixed. But if I don't have to worry about that, I can just say restart it, it restarts it, and then we're essentially done. Okay? So it's pretty simple from that perspective. But once we finally end up on the situation here with the replication link analyzer to that secondary site server, it said the link failed because of earlier issues that it tried to fix. Rerun this thing and see what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and let's do another refresh here. It still shows that a link has failed. I'll run the replication link analyzer on that secondary site server. And it says that there was a failure for that. And at this point, what is happening, if you look at the logs, is it's actually reinitializing the site because I broke it so badly. And it's sending the data up and down back to that secondary site. And so it'll take a bit longer than we have to wait for it to finally rectify itself. And I've got 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds left. So I have essentially just going to wrap up real quick with one single slide, and that's it. Again, go to your administrative console first. Then you can look at some of the status messages in your administrative console and run the replication link analyzer. Finally, if you have to go to logs, go to them. And then I didn't even include going to SQL Server because I don't want you there. But I hope this was very helpful for you. If you have any questions, I'll be down in front. There's going to be another detailed troubleshooting session by Saud on Friday if you want to go to it. And you can go take a look at some more detailed troubleshooting information there. Thank you very much for your attendance.